The Chicago Bulls have won 4 of their last 5 games and just narrowly lost to a Milwaukee Bucks team that was pretty much entirely healthy. And of course, they have been doing this without the help, or I guess, hurt of Zach Lavine. Hello everybody, welcome to Awesome Rusty Bucket. Subscribe to the channel if you have not already and drop a like on this video. It only takes 1 second to make a massive difference on how the video performs in the YouTube algorithm. So as you well know, assuming that you did watch my main channel video recently, I definitely do not believe that Zach Lavine is a very positive player for a winning situation. However, I also didn't necessarily expect the Bulls to look quite as good as they have without him there. The two standouts among really all of this has been Coby White and Patrick Williams, both of which have played really well without Zach Lavine's presence. DeMar DeRozan in this game versus the Bucks, while they did end up losing in overtime, he had 40 and 11. Coby White had 33 points, hit 6 3-pointers. As a whole on the season at this point, he is now shooting 43% from 3 on 7 attempts per game. He's been averaging over 20 plus points per game, over 5 plus assists per game during this stretch where they've been winning, and Patrick Williams has been averaging 14 points, shooting the hell out of the ball, being really efficient outside of some struggles at the free throw line, but he doesn't get to the line all that much, so it doesn't matter all that much. They have looked much more like a modern basketball team. Pace has been more significant. The thing about the way that offenses have been going in recent NBA history, especially if you take a look at like the Indiana Pacers as the big example, it's really about pushing the pace. Teams have figured out three-point shooting. Pretty much every team can shoot threes pretty well. Not all of them. The Chicago Bulls tend to be not one of them. But on top of that, you also are going to need to be getting up a lot of those shots, and you get up a lot of those shots by taking shots pretty early into the shot clock. And I feel like the Bulls did a pretty good job of not wasting their time. Not necessarily getting a great shot all the time, but at the very least getting a shot up, and then that opportunity's gone. Well, they have another opportunity to score soon after. It's also worth mentioning that they have been a much better defensive team without Zach Lavine. I think Coby White is actually a positive defender at this point. I feel like he has a negative wingspan. I could be wrong about that. And he's not exactly like the craziest leaper in the world, but he is persistent and he does try, and he is pretty physical, surprisingly physical. And I think that's enough for him to be a plus defender, especially a far more positive one than Zach Lavine is. Patrick Williams has always had his defensive upside, but I think lately he's especially been solid on that end. Just as a whole, the Bulls across the board look like a better team in pretty much every statistical category, including three-point shooting, which is the one thing that I wouldn't have expected. The thing that I have always said about Zach Lavine in Chicago is that if anything, he needs to be shooting more three-pointers, but there's not so much of that. There's not so much of the mid-range shooting. DeMar DeRozan is pretty much the only player who's taking this super high volume of mid-range shots. Coby White took a couple in this game, and I feel like Nikola Vucevic took like 3 or 4, but that was pretty much the extent of it for the entire team. And that just means generally pretty good offense. I feel like they did a better job of getting to the free throw line. Like, I'm trying to think of literally anything this team has not been way better at since Zach Lavine's departure, and I don't think there is a single thing. Now, does that necessarily mean that Zach Lavine cannot be in a winning context? But I think what's happening here is something that I've talked about with DeRozan and Zach plenty of times over, is the redundancy of them playing together. They don't really have complementary skill sets all that much. I think their skill sets complemented each other a lot better when they had Lonzo Ball in the equation, and he was doing a lot of the playmaking, a lot of the making the team move with the fast pace rather than being one of the lowest paced teams in all of basketball. But one way or the other, DeMar DeRozan, Zach Lavine, not a particularly positive duo. I don't know if they've ever been a positive together on the floor any time outside of those initial 30 or so games with Lonzo Ball. So DeMar has been kind of freed to be him at his best version of himself. And the other players on this team are getting more opportunity to get into a rhythm because there's more necessity for them within the offense. Patrick Williams is a huge example of this, where I've talked about forever now that the reason why he doesn't improve is because he is never given the reps, he's never given the context to really make all those many improvements. And don't get me wrong, some of this is to blame on him. I'm not blaming it entirely on Zach or the franchise or the amount of options on the floor. But just in terms of like the offense actually looking for Patrick Williams, very, very rarely has that happened in the past. In this case, it's definitely been happening. He's been getting his shots up from mid-range, from three. I guess he's another guy who's taken a couple of mid-range shots. He did take quite a few in this Bucks game. However, I like it when he takes them, so I'm not going to judge him for it as much as I do other players. As a whole, though, I don't think that this team is necessarily good. I definitely wouldn't put them in that category, but I do think the removal of Zach has allowed for more modern approaches to offense, and I think it's led to a more cohesive unit of a team as a whole, which has helped on the defensive end of the floor. Worse defensive personnel being off of the floor because Zach Lavine is a bad defender. Just as a whole package, I think this looks like a better, and even just using the word team, it looks like a basketball team. It does not look like a accumulation of talent. It looks like guys that are actually playing together, playing for each other, and it makes for a competitive team and not one that was like the 13th seed a couple of games ago. I don't expect them to be a playoff team in this context, although there is apparently some discussion about the Bulls trying to get win now players in the Zach Lavine trade, so maybe that is the direction they're trying to go in. Lord knows it's not what I want, because I just don't think that approach to team building really works, especially if you have a franchise that is bad at assembling rosters, a front office that has been historically bad at putting the right players in the right places. So I don't feel good about that potential direction, but maybe that's where they're going to go. But either way, I do think it makes it pretty evident that moving on from Zach Lavine is entirely necessary and entirely what's going to happen. A lot of people have speculated that his injury has been more or less over-exaggerated as an excuse to keep him from playing so that the trade can go down. A lot of people believe that there's a trade package that's already agreed upon that we may or may not hear about on December 15th, because that's a deadline for like a bunch of different players to be able to be traded. Up until then, you can't trade a lot of players in the league. I think it's like over 30% of the league is ineligible for trade until then. I think with this divorce happening before the actual trade, it has made it all the more obvious that the actual trade definitely needs to happen. I'm just hoping that this isn't an example that teams look at and say, hey, maybe we want to dial back what we're giving for Zach Lavine. I know there's been a discussion about how much of a trade market there even actually is, and Lord knows this probably is not helping that trade market. It's not exactly a good look when a team just simply by not playing you gets way, way, way better. You know, that's not an ideal representation of your skill set or your impact on winning. And I do want to throw this here at the end. Zach Lavine was like one of my favorite players in the NBA for quite a while, just because there was a long time where I did believe in him as a franchise, maybe not best option, but definitely secondary option. And I had just hoped that one day we would find an option that was much better than him and not slightly better to equal to him in DeMar DeRozan, depending on who you ask. But, you know, I had high hopes for the guy, and I do think there's a lot of things that were outside of his control that are the problem here. I have no ill will towards Zach. I've seen a lot of Bulls fans kind of turn against him as like an actual person and personality. I don't have any issue with Zach Lavine as a personality. I just do not believe that his skill set is one that is all that impactful. either in a role player version of that or in a star player version of that. That said, I do think the role player version of that is what his destiny is. I do think that's what the future of his career is. I do think LA, as I've said a couple of times now, is just LA being the Lakers, is the place that just makes the most sense. His skill set will be, and his weaknesses rather, will be more hidden than they would be on any other team in the league. I think they have the defense to deal with him and his lapses on that end. And then offensively speaking, that just high volume scoring guard and specifically high volume 3-point shooting guard is something that I think could definitely fit very well within their offense. Back when they tried to trade for Buddy Hield and ended up going with Russell Westbrook instead, I feel like it would be more like that. You know, Zach Lavine is somebody who can get up 9 3-pointers a game and shoot over 40% on them. And that's worthwhile pursuing, especially if all it's going to cost you is like Austin Reeves and a draft pick, or, you know, whatever that deal might end up looking like. But yeah, overall point of this video, the Bulls look good without Zach. I do hope that they start losing soon because I want them to get a lottery pick, but also if there was any year to not really tank, from what I understand about this draft class, it's not a great one. So I'm not going to be as upset about it as I would be in other years. Either way though, that is it. Shout out to Rudy for editing this video, and goodbye.